In November 1784, Thomas Coke arrived from England and met Francis Asbury at Barrett's Chapel in Delaware. The two men, both sent by John Wesley to establish Methodism in America, embraced and began to plan a gathering that would give birth to a new denomination. 1 month later, the Methodist Church in America was formally organized at Lovely Lane Chapel in Baltimore during the Christmas Conference of 1784. Among their actions, members of that body decreed that no clergy could own slaves. The founder of Methodism, John Wesley, a British Anglican priest, decried the inhumane system of slavery in which black people were treated as the property of their masters. They suffered brutal beatings, insults, denial of civil and human rights, and tragic separation from family members who were sold by their masters. The American Methodists ordained as their first bishop Francis Asbury, whom Wesley had sent from England. Harry Hoosier and Richard Allen, both popular preachers and former slaves, were there. Soon, thousands of black Methodist converts, both slave and free, were worshiping among whites in camp meetings and revivals, and their names began to appear on membership rolls. They responded to the impassioned songs and sermons of the Methodist movement and to the simple, unique message that divine grace was for all God's children, black and white, rich and poor, free and slave. Blacks were licensed by Methodists to preach to other blacks and occasionally to mixed congregations. However, they could not be ordained or administer sacraments. But these sons of thunder could preach powerfully, and they inspired thousands of their brothers and sisters to convert to Christianity and to join in this new denomination. Methodism flourished after 1784 as it moved from crowded homes and outdoor camp meeting sites into church buildings. But the growing number of exuberant black worshipers caused discomfort for some whites, especially as church sanctuaries overflowed. That led to racial discrimination, as blacks were forced to sit in balconies and take Holy Communion separately. Richard Allen led black members out of St. George's Church in Philadelphia in 1787 to start what became the African Methodist Episcopal Church. A similar break in New York led to the birth of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church.
Allen understood that these Methodists were saying one thing about who this God is and what grace means and so on, but they were practicing something else. But one of the things that Allen says when he leaves, I am glad I ever heard a Methodist preacher. I will always be a Methodist until I die.
Despite these departures, there was a remnant, a contingent of blacks who also left to form their own societies and churches, but were determined to remain within this denomination and seek justice and equality, no matter how long it would take. Thus, another group of blacks left St. George's Church in Philadelphia in 1794 and organized the African Zor Methodist Society in a nearby butcher's shop. 2 years later, they built a church and established the Zor congregation, the first and still the oldest among black Methodists. Other groups of blacks left the galleries of mostly white churches to form their own Methodist societies and churches where they could meet and worship freely with dignity. Together, these congregations would pay a heavy price for their determination to remain in communion with white Methodists. They would face nearly 2 centuries of racial prejudice and discrimination, as well as ridicule from those black Methodists who had left to form their own denominations. So why did they stay? Perhaps for the security and economic benefits to develop their churches and help their people. Or perhaps for the lofty ideal of a united multiracial church. This was their church too, and they clung to the hope that by staying they could one day change the hearts and habits of their white brothers and sisters. Sadly, that day would be a long time coming. While black Methodists were starting their own churches, they were still under the authority of white pastors. Eventually, they could be ordained as local deacons and elders, but they were tired of serving as mere helpers to the white pastors assigned to their churches. Black leaders continually petitioned the Methodist General Conference to allow them to control their own churches and organize their own regional conferences where they could manage their own affairs. While their petitions were being denied every 4 years by General Conference, they were losing members to their sister black denominations that enjoyed the benefits of self-determination. But in 1864, as slaves were being freed and the end of the Civil War was imminent, leaders of black churches met in Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and the Washington, D.C. area. Together, they petitioned General Conference once again. This time, their petition was approved. Black Methodists organized the Delaware Conference in July 1864 at John Wesley Church, now Tinley Temple, in Philadelphia. Then they organized the Washington Conference at Sharp Street Church in Baltimore on October 31st. The Delaware Conference stretched from Southern Virginia up through Eastern Maryland and Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, and New York. 8 Black mission conferences were organized in just 4 years, and they successfully pushed to gain full annual conference status and voting rights at General Conference. Nearly a dozen more would join them by the end of the century.
The history of the Delaware Conference is significant indeed. These sturdy Methodists preached scriptural holiness across the land, proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ to people who needed freedom of soul and freedom of body.
The Delaware Annual Conference was such an important part of our United Methodist history. Everything that any African American pastor does now came out of the inspiration of the Delaware Annual Conference. It's so important that not only that contemporary pastors, but our youth and our children and people of all different walks of life know about the Delaware Annual Conference as we celebrate our 150th anniversary, but we also recognize that we have a future that's bright because of the sacrifices and the perseverance that those historical figures dedicated their lives to be who they are so we can be who we are going forward.
This is an important history for us today as we think about our ministries in the now and into the future. We have this great cloud of witnesses who began the movement, watching over us and encouraging us as we continue. And it will involve sacrifices and persecutions and hardships. But we know with Christ all things are possible, and we know that the enduring spirits will overcome.